Hi everybody, this is Stefano Mazarin, Geopolitics from Italy. Today we have a epic roundtable with the best of YouTube map analysts on the planet. So today we have WarInUkraine from Ukraine, WeebUnion from Denmark, we have Defense Politic Asia from Singapore, Alex History Channel from Canada, Dimitri MilitarySummary from Belarus, and Jan NewWorldecon from USA. So today the format will be as more as possible fluid. We will not put a lot of sharing maps, whatever, because it's a unique chance to have all these people together. So I'm starting to thank you all for your time. For all the viewers, we are collecting the questions. The format will be more a discussion, and for anything curiosity that you want to ask, if you want specifically to make a question to one of our speakers, please put the name also in the question, or I will put to the speaker that I will prefer. So be clear in your questions. And however, if you like our contents, put like on the video, subscribe to the channel. The real goal of the channel, we are already talking about it many times, it's to create one geopolitical school international next year. We will update you about this project in the next streams. So let's start with the questions. For this one, I will start with war in Ukraine, and if the others will want to follow. Any one of you guys has an idea with the motivating factor of the major offensive? Could it be because Russia made a strong foothold into Nikolaev Oblast and Ukraine knew it's now or never?
Well, from my perspective, so correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I've heard, the West kind of pushed Zelensky to attack. Basically, they told them, look, you've been hyping up this offensive in the media for months. You need to do something. Otherwise, we'll have to stop supplying you with weapons. This is a summary of what happened, essentially. So Zelensky had to launch a real offensive and not some mock-up PR stunt once again. So this is how they sent about 10,000 troops on the Kherson region. And Kherson, because this is the region that the media kept talking about over and over, so this is where it had to be done. And there's the referendum also in this region in the coming weeks. So it's a very important position for Ukraine to recapture.
WeebUnion?
Another important point is the timing itself. I think the main reason why it's now is because if you look at the map, Kherson in the northern region, the front line is very wide around the Kherson area. And in the northern region, there aren't a lot of roads. And now we're entering into the fall season, and it'll start raining a lot and it'll become muddy. So the current timing is that Ukraine actually wants to use the climate and terrain to kind of trap the Russians in the north by cutting off the roads in the center, where we see the largest advancements currently.
So nobody wants to talk. So
Actually,
let me talk.
I have. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
So
Okay.
my opinion is that the Ukrainians don't really have much of a choice. So I saw some on Twitter. They replied. They said that it's a waste of soldiers. The soldiers went in and they got killed. A lot of equipment is lost. But then the question is, what is the alternative? You do not gather troops. Getting all these weapons, and not attack. Sitting there, you still get bombarded. You have to attack. The only worry I have for the Ukrainian troops is that they attack and then stop. That is, I think, that's the biggest worry for the Ukrainian troops, because if you move forward, you capture maybe a few towns, and then you just stop there. The next thing is going to come is just artillery bombardments. You're just going to die. So so I'm following this 2-3 days is still not that bad, but there is this risk that the Ukrainians may freak out about the number of death or equipment loss, and they just stop the offensive. And if they stop this Kherson offensive, they are going to die. They are moving into a position where it's very hard to hold, especially some of these towns is right in the open. They don't have a established entrenchment in these positions. This is going to be very bad for them. So the idea must be to continue to push as hard as you can. I'm not sure how good is the logistic, their reinforcement, their supply lines. I'm not sure how good are they, but they have to keep pushing so that the Russian artillery have no choice but to keep moving. Because if you stay still, the artillery will have the chance to fire at you. But if you keep pushing forward, the artillery will have to retreat. They will not be able to perform any fire missions. So I think that is the main issues I have with the Ukrainian offensive, because I just find that the danger of them freaking out by all these losses, which is very normal for a very intense offensive, which the Russians obviously is avoiding now. You can see that the Russians are just doing it very, very slowly, because they know that if they do it in the same way, they're going to take a big losses. But the Ukrainians have no choice because they do not have air superiority. And as such, they have to push very hard. But then I'm not sure how far they can go, because the danger is that the Kherson front is very big. The southern front is very big. How far can you push? How much your supply line can follow up? That's a very, very big question mark for me.
It's a bit like a D-Day, how I picture it. It's like they have to push forward at all costs, but if they don't push further, it's going to be an even higher cost. So they have no choice but to keep going forward if they have the reserves.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that. I actually have kind of a side question for War in Ukraine, or possibly even Dima Military Summary channel, because you guys seem to be a little
Sorry,
bit
guys, to interrupt, but I don't have visual. So Jules, if you can kind of moderate and say, because there is no kind of like feature in the software where you can kind of raise the hand to respond. So maybe whenever you want me to chime in, just kind of say, hey, we're in Ukraine. Because otherwise,
yeah.
Because I actually have
it's kind of a little bit different level of discussion here.
I actually have a question for you, War in Ukraine, and that there's a rumor going around that there's actually been some talk very recently that the Zaluzhny's, General Zaluzhny, the overall commander of Ukrainian forces, has kind of been at odds with Zelensky, and that he might get replaced or promoted to a position where he's no longer in charge anymore. And there's a rumor going around along with that Zelensky basically gave Zaluzhny an ultimatum to launch an offensive or to be fired. Do you think that's a credible rumor, or what do you think about that?
Well, let's just first actually discuss. Let's start answering that from sort of long end in terms of what's the motivation in the first place, and then we probably will kind of answer that question what you ask. So the first thing is there's general pressure in Ukrainian society to do something, and that's what's building up there, and that sort of translates into political pressure on Ukrainian president, Ukrainian basically leadership, right? And that also translates into pressure on the military leadership, right? So that's how it works from Ukrainian perspective. Whether they may or may not receive pressure from the West, I don't think so, because I would say it's not really culturally sort of typical for the West to pressure someone, because they also understand that then they can be blamed if things don't go well. So that's very unlikely. I think there is kind of hey, here's the things, we provide you weapons, get ready and attack. And the second thing is, if you notice, this is actually second attempt, right? It's not the first one. The first one was almost went unnoticed, wasn't very sort of publicized. I didn't check. It was end of May or early June when it kind of fizzled out. It was also very quiet, by the way, at that time. So this is actually second attempt, and the situation kind of changed over time because Ukraine got those HIMARS systems. So over past 2 months, as it was hammering at those bridges and all of their sort of like logistical infrastructure in the area and depriving Russian side of their ammunition. So they felt sort of things coincided, right? There's enough sort of damage done to logistical side, plus the pressure is bubbling up, right? So you have all of this forces going into one sort of direction, one vector, and so I cannot say Zaluzhny was pressured to do it or not. I think he wants to do it himself as well. So you don't really need to pressure. There is definitely some level of tension between Zaluzhny and Ukrainian president. And this is more going to sort of psychological, I'd say, character of Ukrainian president. He's sort of actor by nature. He wants all of the sort of limelight for himself, and that's very important for him. And he's seeing that the ratings of Zaluzhny inside of Ukraine are high, and I think some people say rivaling the actually higher than the Ukrainian president. And so it's always natural kind of competitive attitude from there. But I don't think that Ukrainian president would actually be able to call it fire Zaluzhny because he has strong support, sort of like popular support in the country. That's the first thing. In the army as well. And then he has a very strong support in the West. So I don't think that the Ukrainian president can do much in this situation. He's not in a driver's seat, I would say. Hopefully that's kind of a long answer to your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so
I'm so lost because I do not know what are all those people.
What do you think of that? What do you think of the situation, Dima? I watched some of your updates, and you tend to give a pretty good battlefield analysis. Do you think
as I see, we lost Julius, right? Julius, are you here? Oh, okay, you're here.
I'm here.
Guys, about this counter-offensive operation in the south, I can say one thing. Many things I can say, but I'll start with something. For example, we understand that to talk about counter-offensive operation in South Ukraine is the same thing if we talk about opening a business. Well, today we discuss about the business, and we understand that we need to open business, we need to earn money, we need to earn a lot of money, and so on. We need to pressure, we need to do this, that, and to be on the safe side, to pay taxes, and so on. So the same thing is here on the south of Ukraine. The Ukrainians want to counter-offensive. They want to, let's say, open this business. But the question is, what are they doing for this? It's totally three different situations. If you have $1,000 to open business, $10,000 to open business, and $1 million to open business, it's three kinds of businesses, totally different kind of businesses. So the same thing about the counter-offensive operation in the south of Ukraine. What forces are you using to do this counter-offensive operation? What forces are you using for this? You can use just an infantry, just to push your infantry on the fields and to be destroyed by the Russian artillery. You can use Ukrainian submarines on the field of your zone if you want so. You can use helicopters if you have. You can use drones. So what Ukrainians use is in this situation to achieve their success. And if we're talking about the report of Minister of Defense of Russian Federation, they're saying that during these 3 days, the Ukraine lost up to 2,000 soldiers. And 1,200 they lost during the first 2 days. And today they reported that the loss of Ukrainians is around 500 soldiers. But what brigade we are talking about? If we are talking about first 2 days, we were talking about 128th Mountain Assault Brigade. Mountain Assault Brigade on the fields of Ukraine. Mountains on the field of Ukraine. And if we're talking about today, the Russians are saying that they managed to defeat 57th Motorized Brigade. If we're talking about this 57th Motorized Brigade, this brigade used to be in Chernigov. There was some kind of rotation fulfilling Before that, they was in Seversk. So, and imagine yourself, the Ukrainians are sending 57th Motorized Brigade, who doesn't know the ground. I suppose that they didn't even knew what they were doing this on those fields, because they were used to be in Chernihiv. Before that, they used to be in Seversk. If we're talking about 128th Mountain Cell, there was in Zaporozhye, near Gulyai Pole. I don't see the attack feast in this area. I don't have another information about other parties that involved in this operation. I'm talking about the local brigades, like say 60th mechanized, 35th, 36th, 28th, 14th. These guys who were there in Kherson since the beginning of this operation, who know every single tree in this area, who know every single grass on this area, who knows everything. These forces, I haven't heard any updates about the fact that Ukrainians sent these forces in the first wave of this counteroffensive operation. So the question is, are they planning to do this? If there are going to be other waves of this counteroffensive operation. We know that today Ukrainians managed to develop their bridgehead near Antonovo, Lazova. They managed to cut the road, at least establish fire control over the road that were heading in the direction of Arkhangelsk. So we can say that the Russian forces who is located in Verkhnykamiansk, or how this town is called on the north of Ukraine, on the north, Vysokopolye and Agilne, these two towns. The Russians are saying, the Russian confirms that these forces are already encircled, at least they are in operational encirclement, and that Chechen forces, European Chechen forces, are attacking Arkhangelsk or something like this. So for now, there are much more questions, more questions than the answers to this question. And as I see, maybe the Ukrainians decided just to develop their bridgehead, and they're sending these newbies like from 57th or 128th. If you follow reports of Ministry of Defense, if we're talking about 128th, I heard a very long time ago the previous report when the Russians attacked or with rockets or artillery these brigades. So it's pretty fresh. 57th just from Chernihiv. They're newbies. These guys, of course, the Russians are saying that these guys were prepared according to the NATO standards. The Russians are saying that it was like the first case during, not maybe the first, but they're noticing that was some kind of first case when the Ukrainians sent not just the regular Ukrainian forces, but the most important idea the Russians are noting that was forces that were prepared according to the NATO standards. It's not just the regular Ukrainian forces. We can say that it's NATO forces, but who uses the old Soviet weapon.
But Dima, I have a question.
Yes.
I heard somewhere that these troops sent to the offensive were actually the ones trained in Britain.
Yes.
So is it possible that these were the ones, the 10,000 men that were actually trained in Britain? Is it possible?
First of all, the question is, why are you saying about 10,000? My calculation, according to my calculation, around 36,000 force. The number is around 36,000 soldiers who was involved. If we're talking, there are of course different types. Some of them were, the main idea was to pin down, to fix forces, the fake flags, fake attacks. And if we're talking about offensive part, yes, it's around 10,000. But if we're talking all along the front line, more than 36,000 is involved in this operation.
And how do you get those numbers? But it's very interesting.
Just according to some calculation, you can take a look at disposition. I don't have this information from some source.
I know.
Understanding of this situation that.
Intuitive
by looking at the units, you're like, okay, if there's that many units, there must be that many troops about, right?
Yeah, something like this. Just my personal calculation.
And the Russians, how many? 20,000?
Alex, sorry. Alex
just
and
about,
Dima, about like this question, it was War in Ukraine that wanted to say something about the 10,000 from UK. So we can.
Just want to add color. It's there. This is not those. First of all, 10,000 from UK. It started sometime end of June, early July. So, and it's 3 months training. So they're not even done. They will be on the battlefield sometime end of September, early October. So that's the first thing. Then second thing, when military summary is referring to, you know, mountainous brigade and all that stuff, in Ukrainian army it's total mass, so the names are totally irrelevant, because airborne brigades have tanks in them, you know, T-64, T-80s. It's total disorganized mass, so it's not even worth, you know, looking at them from their sort of formal, like, boilerplate names. In Russia, it makes sense. It's all more logical. In Ukrainian army, it's total disorganized mess. The reason 128 is there, because it didn't suffer. It's much more fresher situation. It's old unit, sort of call it veteran unit, and it has a strong fighting spirit. That's the only reason. Those are reasons it's there. It's not the only one brigade that's attacking, because simply the brigade is not enough. I mean, you see they're facing 7th Airborne Division, which is 3 regiments, then 98th Airborne Division, and those kind of like low quality Russian brigades, and also 20th Division there. So this is attack from all of those Ukrainian brigades, including 28th, 59th, and even Ukrainian militia brigade from Odessa was being pulled in. Like, not the entire unit. It also needs to be understood that frequently it's kind of like a ragtag team of different sort of detachments that being pulled from different units, and that's another problem in Ukrainian command. There is, in a way, really messy situation there. So hopefully that a little bit answers your questions.
So are you suggesting that those are sorry, just real quick, those are ragtag units, or it's kind of a disorganized mess? Is it more because of like heavy losses in these mountain assault brigades and these air assault brigades, which typically you would think would have slightly more training or be better conditioned, at least if you know they're mountain assault, like just intuitively, that's what I'm thinking. But are they experiencing heavy losses throughout the war, and they're just refilling the ranks with untrained conscripts, and that's kind of why they've like lost their not like elite effectiveness, but like their like edge up in battle that they would generally have?
Well, I mean, it's just a general true statement for both sides, right? Both sides are going down in quality, because the best are dying kind of like first on both sides. So Russian infantry is going down in quality as well, in Ukrainian as well. Overall, if you look from a sort of statistical point of view, like low big numbers, 128s did not suffer actually as many sort of losses from the very beginning of the war. Just kind of happened, just lucky, I guess. They were not attacked they were not in any sort of difficult defensive position, so they retained more of those veteran soldiers in them, more trained soldiers, and though that's why probably, and they are kind of like on the quiet section of the front line. That's a Zaporizhzhia section, so that's why probably they were pulled in as their sort of like a striking force, and the rest, all of this like 60th brigade, whatever that is there, they more like call it filler. It's probably not the nice sort of way to say it, but to extent that's kind of like your kind of like a base. In terms of ragtag, it just mess in terms of Ukrainian like upper and middle command. That's that problem there. There's a lot of incompetence. There's a lot of actually Russian agent and Russian infiltration there. So this all creates that is more responsible for that stuff. That they had time to prepare and all of that. So you cannot just blame it. Oh, they losing so many people and it's difficult, because they were not like retreating, and they were not like beaten down and trying to kind of catch their breath and throwing whatever they can throw into the battle. It was planned. It was their situation on the entire front line. There was more or less quiet, like relatively, I would say, and so it was sort of prepared action, and it's more failure on the, as I said, middle and upper command in Ukrainian army.
On war in Ukraine, I want to ask, do you have any indication of how much Ukrainian troops is involved in this southern offensive?
well, we can just kind of like look and kind of like count. Like, so we have 60th Brigade, then we have 2 Naval Infantry Brigade, which again, names totally useless. We can just say 35th and 36th, 46th, 63rd. So it's like 5, 128, 6, 28, 59. So 8 brigades at least, and plus
60,
the
63rd.
brigade as a filler. And you can just throw a random number about 3 to 4,000 each. So that's where you're getting. And then could be also, there's like a lot of this like battalion type of like detachment and even like standalone. And there's no way to track those. It's impossible. Like throw a bunch of those in the sort of number. That's kind of like your more or less number.
So we are looking at around 25,000 to 30,000 troops in this southern offensive, because I count like it. Is that it?
Well, I would say probably more like somewhere like middle 20s. We don't know exact situation for each brigade, like how many like, you know, I think they were filled to the top, to the max before the attack, because it was relatively quiet line, like, you know, front line. There's enough conscripts, all of that. So they were filled with equipment, because they use, everybody probably knows, they're using this Polish T-72s that were refitted in Ukraine then. You know, they use all of those M113 from Netherlands, but meaning that's like, you know, US made IFVs. So they were refitted like to the problem is that Ukraine is still lacking in terms of heavy equipment overall. Sorry, I'm not gonna take too much time because I feel like I'm too much.
Military summary. How about your side? Military summary. Do you, what's your number from your side? What's your estimate?
First of all, let's clarify what do we understand under the question, what is offensive state for the brigade? For example, if I'm talking about 36,000 soldiers, I'm also talking about some brigades, or as WarInUkraine told us, about some militia forces that were sent from Odessa in direction of Kherson, just to prepare the second line of defense. It's also some kind of offensive operation. They wasn't involved in the, let's say, storming operation, but they were involved in this offensive operation. So I suppose it's something around 36,000 soldiers. And I think that the main problem from Ukrainian side, why they can't crack this nut, is because of lack of artillery. This war is a war of artilleries. And as I see, the Ukrainians, they don't have enough of artillery power to keep very intensive and effective artillery duels and try to. Furthermore, if you take a look at these 3 days of this operation, have you heard about any Bayraktar attack during these days? To tell the truth, this evening I got the first update from the Russian sources that the Ukrainians used Bayraktar during the offensive operation, but there were no using of these drones during the previous 3 days. So as you can see, there is a very big problem, or they want to keep the main forces, the main power for the upcoming days, because we know that the 8th of September is not very soon. You still need to keep pressure for another 8 days before the meetings in like this between vendors of Ukraine. So that's why maybe they decide to keep Bayraktars and other system, artillery system. And I suppose that maybe they will start using them something on the 6th of September, and we're going to see the real hell between 5th and the 8th of September. That would be something very interesting.
Okay, I would like to add to this analysis of how many there are in the offensive. So first of all, the consistency of the troops. I'm not that well versed in the different brigades and so on. However, my assessment is that the units or soldiers used in this offensive is a mix of the British trained soldiers, the Ukrainian soldiers who went to Britain to get special training there, where their main focus was artillery. So most likely they will not suffer as much casualties as the other composition of the troops there, which are mostly the battle-hardened Ukrainian soldiers from the Donbas region, as well as the northern region, as they are more well-versed in this type of combat, and they have experienced advancing and retreating in these battles. Now, about the number, I'm not that sure myself, but I'm estimating about 25,000 as WarInUkraine does for the ones who actually are conducting the offensive. So I think we all agree it's somewhere around the mid-20s. For that, I think the main focus is in the center and the south, as we see that in the north, the Ukrainian focus is mostly just to pin down the Russian defenders, as they will try to cut Kherson in two from the center. As we can see that there's a river going straight through the area, and the area itself is very open, so the Russians will have a very difficult time retreating, as Ukrainian artillery has a good firing range over the whole area. Now, the objective here for the Ukrainians is to gain as much ground in the first few days, because their current operation is to try and reach to the roads and advance through them, while they shell the bridges as well as the supplies of the Russians. However, they're burning a lot of ammunition doing that, especially with how they've used a lot of ammunition already in the past couple of months preparing for this operation. While at the same time, Russia has been shelling the HIMARS ammunition stands and so on. So these first couple of days are the most important, as we will see how much momentum the Ukrainians are able to build up. A week from then, the first couple of days, 2, 3, 4 days, we will see most likely that the situation will stagnate, and there'll be a lot of back and forth in different locations. We've already seen the bridgehead. First, the Ukrainians took Sukhi Stavok, then they were pushed back, and now they pushed all the way to Druskinsky, which is on the road. So there's a lot of back and forth already, but we will see that intensifying to a larger degree in the next coming week. And after that week, we will see either side either being cut off. Most likely what I see is the Russians are waiting for more Ukrainian troops to pass the river, after which they'll destroy the pontoon bridge and try to encircle them that way, cut them up from supplies, and mow them down with artillery, as we have seen so far. Because there's no reason for them not to destroy the pontoon bridge other than that so far. As I've seen data on the Ukrainian air defense system ability so far, and it seems to be around 5% intervention rate, because how the Russian missiles and rockets have, most of them are supersonic. They break the speed of sound, which makes it difficult for them to actually shoot them down. And they have an accuracy rate, especially the Iskander missiles, of 1 to 5 meters. So it's not difficult for them to actually destroy the pontoon bridge. So most likely this is some kind of trap, but it's very risky, as they risk the Ukrainians actually taking Davidiv Brid, which is the other village next to the river, and creating this kind of very far wide beachhead. So generally we will see in the next coming days where the momentum of this offensive goes. And once this offensive is over, if Ukrainians win, they have a very good view from the Western world, as well as increasing their support, and it will be a great morale boost for the Ukrainian army. And if they fail this offensive, they will be very weak. It will be in a very, very weakened state, and the Russians will be able to reinforce way quicker than the Ukrainians are able to. And they would have spent their best soldiers, both NATO trained and battle hardened, and they will have lost most of their equipment. According to the Russian Ministry of Defense, they've already lost 120, I think, armored vehicles in the first 2 days, which is about 12% of what they have left, according to the Russian Ministry of Defense. So you can take the source with a grain of salt, but it is the data that we have.
And what about infantry? I know they say 2,000 casualties, but the Russian Ministry of Defense says 2,000 military personnel destroyed. But is it only killed in action, wounded? What does it include?
From my understanding is that for every armored vehicle, we have about 10 casualties. So most likely it is both wounded and killed.
Okay.
The Russians are saying if we read in Russian, it's killed.
Okay, that's a
like
destroyed,
Russian.
killed, right?
Yeah, that would mean a casualty rate of about
The
7,000.
very
Let
important
interject into
note.
all of this and just say that all of these numbers from either Ukrainian Ministry of Defense or Russian Ministry of Defense are completely inflated lies. They totally basically junk. If you base any of your logic on that junk, you're gonna have to, junking junk out. That's just the reality of it. Like Ukrainian side is reporting 47 or something killed Russian soldiers. That's not true. The same
I
as
completely agree.
Russian Ministry of Defense also reports, I don't know how many, like 4,000 Ukrainian tanks destroyed. It's totally made just in stratosphere number, completely wrong. This reminds me actually reports from the Red Army World War II when they were killing Germans by thousands, 10,000s, and Germany simply didn't have enough. The same approach works here, and I think it informs about their I don't even know how to use that. I actually personally don't use it, don't trust at all, because it's just junk, pure junk.
Yeah, agree. Because in my coverage, I also always tell my viewers, don't trust the numbers, because the numbers, they can't possibly know. The reality is that you can't possibly know what's the real casualty numbers. For example, artillery shell hits a defensive position. Some of the body will just disappear into pieces. How do you count the dead bodies? Then including even the Ukrainians, they don't even know how much troops they actually lost. They only know how much troops they lost contact with. So because as some of the Russian forces, as they push forward, especially at Pisky, as they move over the defense lines, they start to realize there's so much dead bodies. Some of them already turned into skeletons, and the Ukrainian command can't possibly know what is the real situation. Is everything is just fog of war. So I don't encourage anyone to put too much faith in all these numbers, and it's not that important, which is why in my coverage I always tell people the most important thing is, did they capture that stupid town? If they don't capture that stupid settlement, then all the number of dead soldiers you kill, it doesn't really matter at all, because if you can kill 1 million soldiers, so what if you didn't win the war? So that's my point of view.
I completely agree. That's why I usually tell to my own viewers, whenever there's an estimate like this, always take it with a grain of salt. But also, the range I usually use is 40 to 80% accuracy. So that's a very wide range, but it is how uncertain these numbers are. So when they say 100 tanks destroyed, then it's usually between 40 and 80.
And
if I can put I had a special question that I never received in all the live stream now. So it's from Charles, but it's one of a regular follower. Any thought on the reports of the use of Afghan pilots in Ukraine? Are the reports accurate? And if so, does it mean that Ukraine is running out of pilots? If someone of you have anything,
yes, there is information that Ukrainians is out of pilots, but there is a lot of rumors, talks about this. One more thing about Kherson operation, just I see that we discussed this offensive operation, and WeebUnion told us that he thinks that the main goal of Ukrainians in this offensive operation to gain territory, and to take to encircle, to cut into pieces, and to encircle and to destroy and so on. Let's say Vad from DPA told us that he asked his viewers not to believe if you are not taking any territories, but you're just killing soldiers, right? Right? Am I right? Correct me if I'm wrong. But the thing is,
as in the importance, in the war. So if you don't capture territory, then it's not because the numbers we can never verify. It can never be confirmed. Yeah.
The thing is that I think, my opinion, that the main idea of Ukrainians in this operation is not to gain territory or something like this. I think it's my opinion that Ukrainians are not able to do this anyway, and my opinion that they understand this as well. But the thing that they understand as well, they understand that they are able to deal as much as possible damage to the Russians. To reduce their manpower as much as possible, to destroy any roads that connects Kherson with the mainland, and after that to support a very low level of the Russians on this side of the river. Meanwhile, because of no problem with support of their part of near Nikolaev. They will be able to increase the manpower during the few months, and after that they will be able to do another offensive operation. Because my opinion that now the Ukrainians just want to get as close as possible to the Russians, to get in close combat and to destroy them, and of course with big losses from their side as well. But for the Russians, it will be much more difficult to fulfill Kherson area with reinforcement in comparison with the Ukrainians, because for them it's not a big deal. But if you're talking about the Russians, they need to cross at least 3 bridges: Antonov Bridge, Novokakhovka Bridge, or dam, and the railroad that located between these 2 bridges. And if there are no bridges, that means that you need to use pontoon bridges. But we saw this week the Ukrainians were pretty successful by attacking these pontoon bridges. So if Ukrainians are able to cut every single line, that means that at least at this stage of operation, they don't need to conquer the territories. They don't need towns, villages. The only thing they need to reduce the Russians as much as possible. So that's why the Russians, as you can see, was a very big question for me, why the Russians are leaving these towns. If we're talking about, let's say, Kadema, the Russians took this town more than a month. Pieski, they haven't taken this town yet, because the Ukrainians keep this area and they want to have close combat with the Russians. But if we're talking about Kherson, we see that the Russians leave in every single town as soon as they see that Ukrainians reach this town so close. They're leaving this town, please take this town, no problem. And they go back on the more reliable position, and then they start shelling this area one more time, trying to reduce. So the Russians want to avoid any close combat. They want to keep their soldiers because they understand that in future it will be very difficult to reinforce them all.
It makes me think the history part, that it's like the Mongols, like whenever they get close, they retreat, fire at the enemy, but they avoid contact. And the closer the Ukrainians are to the Russians, they can't use artillery. So they retreat, fire, and then so yeah, I see it happening in a lot of places. But also on the breachhead, the problem of the Ukrainians is that they want to enlarge it along the river, north and south, and apparently they have not managed to link up the crossing points with different. They did not manage to link up all the crossings together, and the center of this position, I think it's Davidiv Brid. And they did not. A little
bit west from Davidov and Andreevka, Lazova.
But what I think they want to do is that to make Davidiv Brid the center, and they attacked in the south, and they want to link up with the north, with the town that starts with the V, Vyskopilya.
Yes, absolutely correct.
So
I agree with you.
So I think they launched many attacks, but the ones that have to link up did not work. Yet, I don't know if it's made on purpose or not, but there's one column that managed to pierce through like 10 kilometers. But now they seem to be isolated in the middle of Russian territory. And for them, it might be like the Battle of Ilovaisk in 2014, if I remember, where they're in the road and then they can get bombarded.
I have a slightly different perspective to counter, not to be too argumentative with what Dima is saying, but in terms of like the overall strategic picture of like why the offensive's going in the first place, I see the point about trying to deal damage to the Russians. It seems like that's been the goal of the Western sponsors of Ukraine. Their entire reason why America and the British and the EU are participating in helping Ukraine is less, because for the media reasons why they say that Ukraine is like a democratic bulwark and we have to defend them. It's less for all these reasons and more because they want to do damage to the Russians, right? Like the idea, and it's been stated many times, is that, if they can do enough damage to the Russians and cause enough attrition to the Russian army in Ukraine, then any kind of war against NATO, whether it be in the Baltic states or in Poland, would just be non-viable for the Russians. If the Russians are partially defeated in Ukraine, we won't have to fight them in Europe, right? So to segue into what you were saying about the damage thing, like I don't really understand the logic, and I agree that this is seems to be one of the things that Ukraine's doing. But I don't understand the logic of trying to deal a lot of damage to the Russians with heavier sacrifices on your side. Like, we all know that the Russian Air Force is larger and more superior than the Ukrainian Air Force. And we all know that the Russians have a higher number of equipment parity to the Ukrainians in terms of heavy equipment, tanks, IFVs, you name it, per soldier to the Ukrainian side. So intuitively thinking, there's no way that the Ukrainians can reach, if the armies are truly equivalent, right? If they're truly both post-Soviet armies that use the same equipment, the same fighting style, I don't see a path where it makes sense for Ukraine to do damage to Russia at the cost of higher damage to itself. So in terms of the overall strategy here that I've seen, I think the Kursk and counteroffensive has to be more geographic in nature than anything kind of like in terms of superior firepower destruction, right? So if Ukraine, assuming that Ukraine is going to eventually lose the war, right? Assuming that eventually perhaps Russia decides that they want to mobilize, that they want to throw an extra 100, 200,000 troops into the combat, which would be a game changer, Ukraine would have a lot of difficulty holding on to the country, right? So my position has always been that if Eastern Ukraine falls, the only place to hold the Russians back is on the Dnieper line, which would be a great defensive line. And that would be next to impossible to do if the Russians already have a bridgehead across the Dnieper, which they achieved in the first 3 or 4 days of the war. So if Ukraine wants to last long term and be a viable state that retains a coastline, retains these ports in Mykolaiv and Odessa to be economically viable, they have to retake Kherson and drive the Russians back east of the Dnieper in order to finally be able to set up a defensive line that they can hold probably indefinitely, right?
Yeah,
What do you think of that, Demon?
I will say I used to think like you, but one day we have a discussion such as it you were saying that the Dnieper is the very nice line to defense. Yes, I totally agree with you. But believe me, if the Russians decide to attack Ukraine, and let's say they don't have bridgehead at Kherson, right? And if they decide to attack one more time, believe me, they will do this from the territory of Belarus. There is no Dnieper there, and they will cross Belarus easily with the number of forces they need without any problem. And they will attack Kiev, they will attack Lvov, Rovno, and Dnieper is not a problem. It's like we see this, that we are saying that the Russians are not going to attack through Belarus. The same thing we were saying before the February. The Russians are not going to attack Ukraine all along the border. We think that they will have some clashes around the borders of DPR. But what happened? The Russians, they can attack anywhere they want, anywhere they like. And if they need to use Belarus one more time, they will use it. Not even once.
So but do they have enough reserves for this? Do they have enough reserves right now to do this?
The Russians have 2,140,000 army.
And so what are they waiting for? What are they waiting for then?
They don't want to use the conscript. They want to use the volunteers and so on. For now, at least they don't see I don't think what is in their minds, but who knows what they're thinking about.
So you're from the region of Belarus, correct? Is there not some topographic, geographic defensive advantages there? I know it's like much heavier forested area, and it's kind of marshy in a lot of places, correct? On the border between Ukraine and Belarus?
It's just a long forest. It's a forest and very low land, but it's not a problem to cross this area for the Russians.
Okay.
Once the Russians did this in 1943, 1944, crossing this area, attacking the German forces from the south, so they can repeat this situation, but from the north.
Yeah, so I want to
sorry. Can I put like one question, because I didn't put. This is another specific question, maybe also for war in Ukraine, that is from Ukraine. We have also everybody want to answer. Why is Russia looking so reluctant to strike Ukrainians' military airports? We got 1 week ago a notification that a base was bombed could this not have been done sooner? As a strategy from Russia, like your point of view.
Okay, I can say something. Well, my point of view, it is mostly useless to strike airports, because what are you going to strike? The runway? They'll just build a new one. It doesn't take much time. The bases, they can just build a new building. The aircraft, they keep receiving new ones. So striking the air bases isn't really that useful, as they can just rebuild whatever they strike. So it's a waste of a rocket.
You don't, the Soviets in Soviet time, the Soviet country built their roads to use as the airport waste. So you don't need even to build airports. You can use like a local roads. Let's say from Lvov to Kiev or Odessa, Kiev, there is highway, and you can use this highway as the area to start flying with your aircraft. So it's not a problem.
Yeah, and I think not just that, it's because the Ukrainian Air Force is largely decimated. They don't have that much Air Force left. And the Ukrainians have adapted to this situation by always moving their aircraft. Every time they fly out, they will actually land in a different airbase to prevent tracking from the Russian side. And every time there's air raid silence, I understood that they will immediately take off to avoid getting struck on the ground. So it became so difficult that it's no longer viable for the Russians to waste money on trying to strike these aircraft on the ground. Although a few days ago they seems to have still succeeded doing that on 2 of the air bases, but most of the time it's basically it's really, really hard. So I think they just gave up altogether.
I'm actually really glad we segued into this, because we had a previous question about Air Force, and now this question is actually something I was going to ask, and I want to ask Dima and War in Ukraine possibly your opinions on this. But there has been a lot of talk throughout the war. I mean, the claim that Wyatt has just made it's been made several times that the Ukrainian Air Force is gone, it's been completely destroyed, yet they do seem to be operating. And most of these battlefields, we still hear all the time about Su-25s and MiG-29s being shot down. If they're being shot down, obviously the Ukrainians still have them. So a theory that I presented to my viewers, and I want to know what you guys think of this, because you're closer to that part of the world. But I think that Ukraine probably had a lot of mothballed Su-25s, MiG-29s, and various different aviation equipment sitting in warehouses around the country that probably wasn't counted in their official numbers. So at the beginning of the war, it's like, it was said that Ukraine had an air force of like 200-300 fighters and fighter bombers, right? But it seems now it's apparent that they had way more than that. What do you think that most of the supplemented equipment that they've gotten has been from Slovakia and some of these NATO countries that's kind of been shifted to them under the table? Or do you think that it's mainly been from support on spare parts to convert these previously like maybe cannibalized or mothballed equipment into working fighters and bombers again?
Well, let me jump in. So first of all, going back to that original question about Afghan pilots, I'm very skeptical. I don't think it's going to happen. And it's actually really probably more like a thing of Russian propaganda. It's the same idea as there will be Syrian fighters fighting on the Russian side. All of this, nobody's going to fight for you. This is, in the end, nobody wants to die for nothing. And there is no interest for Afghan pilots or Syrian fighters or Libya fighters to join this whole thing unless they paid a lot, and neither side is known to be willing to pay a lot to sort of mercenary soldiers. So they use there's plenty of sort of resource inside that's cheaper. You don't want to do that. So you're not going to spend money, especially in Ukrainian case where the money is the problem. In Russian case, it's not a problem, generally speaking. So now going back to this air war and all of this stuff, Ukraine had the whole air force was in pretty terrible shape. They never spent money on jet fuel, so they didn't have enough training. The planes were not maintained. So the result, what you hear, this there's tons of Ukraine airplanes, is what we discussed before. You're listening to the junk of this Russian Ministry of Defense that they shooting airplane every day and whatever. Yes, Ukrainian airplanes got shot, but there's what you just said, 200 to 300 is really realistic number. And when Ukraine gets like whatever 4 MiG-29s from Slovakia, it's nothing, right? You agree with that? And in general, I would say air forces of both countries are in pretty bad situation. Ukrainian is definitely worse than Russian for sure, but air force requires a lot of training, a lot of money being constantly spent over a long period of time to maintain it and have quality pilots and everything. Ukraine haven't done that at all, and Russia did it to very minimal level. So they don't have strong, as like I would say, rate like Russian Air Force. It's not great shape in the first place, right? And so also when you think about the Ukrainian Air Force, all of those airplanes, they were essentially not upgraded since the Soviet time. So they're really dated. They're not even sort of, in a way, it's like suicidal mission by Ukrainian pilots relative to even Russian ones, because Russia at least did something a little bit to upgrade their air force, versus Ukraine has done nothing. But in any case, at this point, the role of air force on both sides is very minimal, and effect of it will be, at least right now, on the outcome of the war, because Ukraine has a lot of anti-air missiles and its disposal. So Russian Air Force basically stays away from Ukrainian forces. They cannot do sort of direct, exact strikes on Ukrainian side, and that's why I'm mentioning in my videos that it's all unguided missiles. It's just like shooting with a what's it called? Gun. What's the name of the English word like for the when you shoot with like small pellets, like going the gun? What's that? Shotgun, I think, right? And it goes everywhere at long distance. There's precision is close to zero, and effect is close to zero as well. Just kind of like more propaganda pictures and beautiful, nice pictures. That's all it is. So I wouldn't even focus on Air Force sort of or an air war, because it's it's the effect of it is close to zero, and in the Ukrainian Air Force is essentially destroyed. And yes, there is probably lack of pilots because they were used mercilessly, basically thrown suicidal missions, and Ukraine doesn't have many of them in the first place. So because there was no money invested by the state in that direction. But overall, it's like, we're not like, let's say, if we go back to World War II, there was like, British Air Force and German Air Force were top notch. None of these countries has any, like, their Air Force is low quality overall, if you would think. And then for that reason, it's not able to change the outcome of the war at this point.
War in Ukraine, I want to ask you if you have seen any information on where the Ukrainian military getting all these new pilots. So according to the Russian Ministry of Defense, the total number of fighters or just airplanes shot down is 280. So it's not some stupid number. I know some of my viewers always say 500, kind of stupid numbers. No, Russia MOD claimed 280. So 280 is around there, makes sense, logical. But no, where Ukraine is getting all these new pilots to fill in all these new aircraft that they are getting from their supporters. Do you have any sources or?
So it's all mostly people who retired, right? That's who gets called back, and the same is in Russian case, right? There was a general that was piloting the airplane that sort of was recruited through Wagner sort of group, and he was flying. He got shot down. The same idea. Both sides basically, as I said, both sides did not invest properly into Air Force, and it requires a lot of more money. It's not like land forces, army, which is relatively low expense. This requires a lot of money. Just for just to explain the numbers we're talking about, like 1 hour of flight of, let's say, F-22 costs like $60,000. Just 1 hour flight, and you can imagine. Okay, maybe those MiGs and all of those Suze, they don't require $50,000-$60,000 per hour, but it's still like probably $5,000 per hour, and Ukraine definitely doesn't have that money, and Russia also was focused on building rockets and stuff like that. So they also, to extent, channeled their money in the wrong direction. To extent, I'm not saying, and going back, there is clear evidence that there is a shortage. The Russia start to feel the shortage of the rockets, meaning that inventory has been used, and what they use is what they produce, and the production rate is low. So they need to really think hard on what targets they want to spend those rockets, and they realize that the Ukrainian Air Force is useless, non-existent. So that's not top priority, basically.
War in Ukraine, if I can add a question to that one, what's your assessment on the Ukrainian mobilization up to now? Will these conscripts be good for much more than fighting on the defense?
For sure, it's, as the war goes by, what I said is the quality of the manpower is going down, infantry, on both sides, right? So hard to predict where it's going to go, right? There's plenty of sort of mobilized men and women actually in Ukrainian army. Well, women are not mobilized; they actually volunteer for the most part. That's actually, most people don't. By the way, in terms of the sex ratio in Ukraine, it's about 2, 3, or up to 5% of their sort of the army population are women, which is not the case for the Russian side. Meaning they also fight on the front lines. But in Ukraine has right now plenty of people for now, right? Because it's a smaller country. But in the long run, if Russia does mobilization, then Ukraine in the current sort of state has no chance, because it's not efficient. And I'm saying this all the time. And it's possible to fight back, but the way it is right now in Ukraine, it's not efficient. So hopefully that answers.
Let me put another question. This one is for Alex, because you are silent, so I need to bring you in. About which unit seems to be the most effective on both Ukrainian and Russian sides?
Well, it's hard to say, because you have one unit that goes in battle, they have casualties, they're replaced with guys that don't have experience. But I would say that late for the Russians, the ones that attacked in Luhansk, these seem to be very good troops, and they fulfilled their mission. So in my opinion, these are among the best troops, and the one in the Kherson as well, because there's been many attempted attacks in this area, and from my understanding, they seem to be very mobile on a tactical level, which not many Russian units can do, even on the Ukraine side, to fix the enemy on one point, counterattack at another, and coordinate all this. It's not as easy as we think. We look at the map from above, it's easy, but in the middle of it, it's chaos. So these two groupings are among the best Russian troops, and it's normal. You want to protect the flank at Kherson. It's very important for the Russians to hold the line. As for the Ukrainians, well, Dima talked about it in the early part of the video.
Dima, the WeebUnion, sorry, because Dima have to go. So if you want to make it was like the last question, but because you have to go, so I will give you what is like your outlook or your forecast. As we said, it was also the last question, also at the end of May. What is your opinion about the outlook of this war, remembering that the winter is coming?
It's a very, very interesting question, but I would like to answer the question about the most effective forces. If we're talking about the Ukrainians, I think that the most effective forces is those guys who is those commandos, these RECO guys who is destroying and killing people, the authorities on the territory of Russian Federation, those guys who destroyed the ammo depot in the Crimea, those guys who killed these people who joined the Russian Federation, those authorities. This is the most powerful forces from the Ukrainian side. These RECO guys. and as I know, they are trained by the British intelligence. And if we are talking about the Russians, I think that there are a lot of powerful forces, and it's of course the Brave One, the Wagners, and the 11 regiment of LPR, and the DPR Somalia, and the DPR 7th regiment. These guys who are storming right now, Mariinka, Peski, these brave soldiers who came from underground, because there's used to be person who was working on the mines. So these are the brave guys. These are the most powerful. And about projection.
Sorry, Dima. So, what you said about the Ukrainian was more like the sabotage group.
Sabotage group,
people
yes,
who go behind the lines.
This is their most powerful army, and they're doing their best job. The most successful in the Ukrainians. They're doing a lot of damage to the Russians, a lot of media victories, a lot of things that happen. So we can't compare. Of course, they're not killing thousands of Russians, but they're doing their job well. And as we can see, the Russians don't, at least for now, they try to find a solution how to counter this problem. And this is a very big problem, because in the 11th of September, they're going to, maybe there's rumors, going to be some referendums, and I suppose that more and more terrorist attacks from the Ukrainian side we're going to see. So that's why it's, for now, this is the biggest problem. And we're talking about
for the outlook, if you are you want to close, we'll say goodbye.
Kherson battle. By the way, very important topic. Maybe you will discuss this without me. Maybe War in Ukraine will give us very interesting updates, because as far as I understand, there are a lot of information we receive now from Kharkiv underground. The sources are saying that Ukrainians managed to collect a lot of forces in the Kharkiv underground, tanks, artillery. So the Kharkiv underground is one of the biggest underground in the world. It's kilometers underground. You can go very far. This underground was built during to be on the safe side during the nuclear war with the United States of America. So you can live in the Kharkiv underground for a very long time. So the sources are saying that Ukrainians managed to collect a lot of forces, a lot of equipment, and so on, with one reason: to start offensive operation, maybe in direction of Balaklia, maybe in direction of Russian border. But anyway, it's also very interesting updates. If you have anything update, I would be very interesting to listen to you about this question.
So if War in Ukraine, you want to answer about this thing about Kharkiv, if you have any news, and then we will say goodbye to Dima, and we will continue.
So just a quick response on that. I don't think there is anything building up in Kharkiv. Simply, it doesn't make sense, because what would you do? Just push to the border, which is anyways 5-10 kilometers. You're not going to achieve anything. The attack from Balaklia also doesn't. I don't think Ukrainian army is capable of really attack right now. As I mentioned before, they lack equipment. That's the most important part, but they also lack skills and knowledge how to do it. And the only reason Kherson bridgehead is being attacked is because of those HIMARS systems that are destroying supply routes for the Russian army. If it were just kind of face-to-face in the middle of sort of normal situation, Ukrainian army wouldn't be able to attack. So this is only because Russian troops are being cut off right now on this on the Kherson bridgehead. That's all.
Okay, so, good luck, guys. Have a good.
Thank you, Dima, for your time, and I hope to see you soon. Also live.
See you soon, guys.
Ciao.
All right.
So,
add to
WeebUnion, if you want to say something, please.
To add to what Alex said about the Russian ability to maneuver, stop the Ukrainian offensive, and relocate to help somewhere else. Funnily enough, as we were speaking, Ryber has updated yet again about the Ukrainian counterattack. And in these reports, there are two important things. The first one is the Russian defenders in Alexandrivka claim they have defended this area, and they are now helping further east. So just as he said. And the second thing is around the bridgehead they have in the mid-center around Andrivka. There are reports of the Russians counterattacking from the north against Suchy Stavok, Kostromka, and the last one, Brushinki, or whatever it's called. So they are flanking from the north, trying to cut off the slim advance. So just as Alex is saying, they are moving around a lot because they have this mechanized advantage, and they're able to coordinate like this.
And they use interior lines, so it's very typical strategy when you have a bubble. The one defending is at the middle and can easily send reinforcements from one place to another, whereas the attacker on the outside, it's a bit more complicated, even for logistics. Oh.
Another question, how much of British and US intelligence operatives are directly involved in Crimea to manage sabotage groups' views? If anybody have an opinion about it?
Not that I have seen anything about this. I think even for Ryba, which is they have probably one of the best intel networks on the OSINT side, I have never seen they talk about this. I don't think the British and the US intel agents dare to do much other than whoever is already working at the embassies and consulates, because it is very tricky to deal with Russia should they try something funny. The real intel threat, the agents or the espionage, is actually still coming from the Ukrainian, because it's pretty hard to differentiate between the Ukrainian and the Russian. Should the Ukrainian be able to speak very good Russian? So, and there are also Ukrainian sympathizers within the Russian populations, or they might be just simply anti-Putin. So, the main threat is still coming from within Russia itself, the Russian or probably Ukrainian cells that are already there for probably years. So I don't think it's the Americans or the UKs have much on what Ukraine already have.
I agree with Wyatt at this talking, as we remember with the killing of Dogina, I think her name was. The alleged suspect is a Ukrainian who traveled through the Donbass Green Line or Green Corridor. So most of these sabotage missions are going to be conducted by either Ukrainians who have fled to Russia but are pro-Ukrainian, or generally just, as he said, Russians who sympathize with Ukraine or is anti-Putin.
Yes, like this was the same question about it. Maybe also if you have also war in Ukraine or Alex or Jan, like any opinion about the significance of the activity of these, let's say, Ukrainian partisans, as Rikel was calling them?
Well, I think it's a bit exaggerated. For people behind the line, I think it's exaggerated, but there are some Ukraine DRG, so the deep reconnaissance groups that carry out attacks. I think what we call partisans are actually infiltrators, units sent behind the front line to inflict damage and that come back. But I don't think people would play that game in this area. Anyway, not from my perspective. The same way we don't see partisan activities behind Ukrainian lines. There could be, but we don't see it either. So perhaps it's much more complicated than we think, because the moment you gather units, you want to do something, you have the FSB knocking on your door. It's harder than in the Hollywood.
Well, my take on this is that there is surprisingly quite a bit of activity, and there is quite a bit of damage being done, specifically to Russian collaborators and especially high-profile figures. There's a good amount of them being killed, and that creates problem for the Russian military administration, because nobody wants to join because they don't want to get killed. So, and that's effectively, that reaches the goal of this partisan war. That's what it's not. They never can win anything, but they can create fear, and they achieving that goal. And it is combination, as Alice said, it is combination of Ukrainian commander groups and also local support, because without local support, commander groups will not be able to operate. So it's always combination of the both, and so far it works, I would say, in overall. But I don't think that's the fate of the war is not going to be decided by partisan activities by any means.
I actually have I have something to add to this, and it's like slightly out of, well, not really out of scope. It's definitely along a similar line. So at the beginning of the war, there was a lot of, like, before the war started, in January and February, there was a lot of talk. Of course, like in Western media, you have a lot of Ukrainian nationalism and stuff going around, not in like a negative context, but like in a like a social context. Like the idea that was presented is this is a united people that want to remain a sovereign Ukrainian state. And if Russia were to, say, like, invade and capture Kyiv and end the war in a week or whatever that they were saying at the beginning of the war, then Russia would be dealing with massive partisan and guerrilla warfare. Similar, I think the idea was presented like if you imagine a peninsular war where Napoleon basically marched straight into Madrid, and there was virtually no war with Spain, or they thought there would be no war with Spain, but all of a sudden they have these small armies, 3, 4, 5, 10,000 rebels popping up all over the country, harassing French lines and doing all this stuff, and it eventually culminated in the French having to withdraw from Spain, right? So I think it was initially assumed that a similar thing would happen to the Russians, that it would be very impossible for Russia to be able to hold the territory of Ukraine with like all this support for a Ukrainian state. Like if Ukraine were to have fallen within a few days, then the battle would have definitely gone on, right? So I don't see the same potential for that. Not saying that it's not there, but in terms of fighting the long game for Ukraine, they fought off the Russians. Kyiv didn't fall. Now they're meeting the Russians in battle and supposedly taking heavy losses. We don't know the real number. But the way I see it is if Ukraine were to keep fighting the war the way they're fighting, and they were eventually to lose, most of the volunteers and stuff that are going to the army and going to the front line are these young military-aged males. Typically throughout history have been the most aggressive and the most willing to fight for a given cause. And if they're all dying right now at the front line, it's really going to take the wind out of any kind of guerrilla or partisan war that would happen if Russia were to win and virtually just occupy, like, let's say, like half of Ukraine. So, I mean, not saying that it wouldn't be there, but in terms of like maybe taking the wind out of the Ukrainian cause and Ukrainian society, I think there's potential for that. What do you think of that war in Ukraine?
Ian, also for war in Ukraine, if I can add to your speech, there is one question that was for military summary, but it's like, let's say, war in Ukraine and you. What conditions have to be met for Russia to achieve a decisive breakthrough in Donetsk instead of mere tactical success such as Pisky and Kodema?
I'm kind of confused by all of these questions. Can you guys kind of summarize in because it's like in two different directions. So if you can just I can start answering these questions.
Okay.
So let me know what you want to answer, and then it's all like I'll answer whatever you want. So just give me clear questions, and that's all.
Ian, let's start with your, and then we will move on.
So do you think, just to summarize what I said, do you think that there was better potential for a successful guerrilla campaign in Ukraine had the capital fallen in the first weeks compared to now after potential serious manpower losses?
I'm honestly confused by this question. Were you trying to say that if Ukraine lost Kyiv, then there would be more guerrilla warfare? I think the way to look at this situation is the local conditions, and the local conditions in their sort of northern northern Ukraine are much better for that, because simply there are more forests, and the conditions in the south are pretty terrible. So even during World War II, there were pretty much non-existent guerrilla warfare in the south of Ukraine, just because of the terrain conditions are terrible for that. That's why I'm surprised that Ukraine is able to do what it did in the south, because most of the killings and everything is happening in the south of Ukraine, in Kherson region and Zaporizhia region, and I'm actually surprised that it's being done, given the terrible conditions for doing guerrilla warfare. So that I don't think I'm answering your question in sort of what you're asking for, but I don't really understand the logic of okay, if Ukraine lost Kyiv, then there will be more. I mean, obviously more, because Kyiv is Kyiv. It's a larger place. So maybe I'm just not really understanding your question.
I think I'm trying to touch on the Ukrainian society edge of it and the will to fight. Like, say if Ukraine were to, they're playing this long game, and if they were to suffer massive defeats on the battlefield and take massive manpower losses, would Ukrainian society be still be willing to keep up a partisan and guerrilla warfare campaign if the country were to fall sometime in the next year, compared to if it would have just fallen immediately and you still had all this fire and all this energy within the population?
I see. I mean, I think there is an answer in your question. Exhaustion leads to less of the guerrilla warfare over time. But there's no question about it. So I think that's the answer.
Silvano, can you put that other question back up? I didn't really get a chance to look at it. There was a question before this, wasn't there?
Right. Yeah, there was something, and I think we lost that question. I don't know how to get it back.
If we can't get it back, then I want to ask a question for the whole panel. Okay, I'll just do that. Masarin, you are muted.
Okay.
Okay,
go
so
with your question.
Mm-hmm. So my question is for everyone, and that is because I have watched some videos on Sky News about the UK Chief of Staff and the second in command of the UK Army, and they have both said that the UK stands in a 1937 moment, and that if they just stand idly by, they will be repeating their mistakes of the Second World War, and that the UK army should be prepared to send troops to Ukraine to fight the Russians in this war. And that if they don't do that, then they will be making the same mistakes. And that is the Chief of Staff as well as the second in command of the UK army. Do you think that is a real possibility in the coming months?
Because we often make a lot of comparison between World War II and the war now. For sure, there's always similarities, but at the same time, is it really the same geopolitical situation as in 1937? I don't know. I think not. I think the outlook geopolitically has completely changed, and the fact that the British are still stuck in that World War II mentality says a lot. That they want to be the rescuer of the world, and it's fine. It's 100% fine. It's just that 1937, Britain was at the top. And the geopolitical situation now is not the same. The people don't fight for the same things. I don't see this comparison.
So I will say, to add to that, there is a clear strategy behind what the British how they act geopolitically, and it's always been there, and it's based off this Mackinder's heartland theory, where they believe that basically if the balance of power shifts in favor of one nation inside of Europe, that nation will eventually someday conquer the world, or at least conquer Europe, and that would actually put the British Isles under threat. The British have always strategically picked sides in their wars in Europe with the underdog, because they don't want any single power to grow. Like before, it was always like, say, signing up with Prussia or signing up with Russia in order to curb Napoleon, because Napoleon was on the path to conquering most of Europe. If he had been able to do that, he'd been able to pull enough resources together on one of the coastlines to build a navy strong enough to challenge the British seas. Same thing once you shift to World War II, the balance of power actually, and World War I as well, the balance of power shifted, away from France and into the industrial might of Germany. And Germany actually had the potential at one point, if they would have kept expanding, to challenge the British at seas. Some people that are historically savvy might know that the Germans actually had a massive fleet of battleships at the beginning of World War I and dreadnoughts. That the British, of course, it was like their main stipulation of the treaty was to scuttle the whole fleet. That's the main thing the British wanted, was that fleet to be gone. And so, like, now after World War II, you have first the power of the French is curbed, then the power of the Germans. The Russians have been the kind of the British fear ever since, because they've always seen if anyone could pull it off and become and shift the balance of power in favor of themselves, it would be the Russians. They control the most land, the most resources. So they've been hyper obsessed about this for probably like 3 millennia. Like 300 years. This is completely, and it's very selfish. It's not. They like to put it out like, we're doing this for the sake of the world. It's not really for the sake of the world. It's for the sake of themselves, because they don't want to be challenged at sea. They don't want British power to be curbed in their little corner of Europe. So do I think that there's logic behind that now? Like, if Russia, can they realistically become that dominant power in Europe? I don't think so. Honestly, I think that, I've gone over this on my channel and I've talked about it in these live streams before. Demographically, Russia is a dying nation. They're rapidly aging. Most of the population of Russia is over 35 years old, over 40 years old compared to the younger side. I think there's twice as many old people as young people. So you're looking at like ethnic Russians being like halved by 2050. The idea that they'll be able to somehow conquer Europe, I think, is a fallacy. But they do have the potential to kind of control Europe in terms of resources, right? And that's, we can get into that topic if there's a question coming up about it. But
let me put one also for Wyatt, because he's silent. So also this one. Do you think, guys, that Russia knew this offensive was going to occur, since a day before the major offensive, the elite 4th Guards Tank Division, equipped with the latest MBT, was killing Kherson?
So before I go to this question, right, I will answer the UK one first. So if you understand World War I or World War II history, you will know that both World War I and World War II, the British are not prepared for war. Even though they have one of the biggest military in the world, in fact, probably the biggest military in the world, in World War I and both World War II, they are totally not ready for war. So in today's situation, in that sense, is similar, where the British are totally not prepared for war. They are underinvested. They are just not having enough of everything to actually fight a war, not even the Navy. Because in World War I, World War II, British have the most powerful Navy in the world. They don't even have that today. In the latest news is that the Prince of Wales, their newest aircraft carrier, just broke down. They can't even do the exercise with the Americans just today. So that's the reality. But however, why the British are being so gung-ho? Because we need to go back to Brexit. The British have decided, the United Kingdom have decided to break out from European Union. They want to path their own geopolitical future. So these major divisions put them at odds with the entire of Europe, the European Union. So since the moment of Brexit, UK and the European Union is actually adversaries. They are actually rivals, which is why the United Kingdom has been doing all the weird stuff that a lot of people don't seem to understand, like AUKUS. They built a new alliance between Australia and United States. All these are maneuvers to build up their own profile again, to be able to stand shoulder to shoulder against the European Union. European Union is really, really powerful. So the United Kingdom is now doing all sort of weird stuff. For example, the illogical support of Ukraine. They are outsized. They are so far away from Ukraine. It's outsized. It's not a threat. Russia is not a threat to them. But they don't need gas from Russia. They're just simply doing this for geopolitical means. They want to use Ukraine as a tool to build their geopolitical profile, to make themselves into something that it can rival the European Union. and Poland is on board. The Baltic states is on board. So there is some talk about the British trying to build this new alliance with the Baltics, Poland, Ukraine into some kind of a new alliance, some kind of new European Union sort of things. This is happening, and Boris Johnson himself also have his own ambition, personal ambition. He want to become like a Churchill. He want to be remembered as a great leader, which is failing terribly now. But which is why he's pushing all these things to make United Kingdom looks a lot more powerful than it actually is. That's why they are actually helping the Ukrainians to train their soldiers. But to say the UK will bring troops to Ukraine, that's literally impossible because they don't really have enough to do that. Which is why they are doing the most symbolic thing. They train the Ukrainian soldiers and send them to die, and that's what the UK is doing. And I kind of lost where I'm going.
No, I think you're on. I really do think you're onto something because I mean, and this is it's not talked about often, but there was a very big. I mean, this is the primary reason why a lot of parties within the UK wanted to leave the EU. I mean, of course, they sold it to the voters in a different way, and there was a lot of different talking points that we're not going to go through. But like one of the main reasons was kind of geopolitical maneuvering or basically a freedom to maneuver because they don't have that under the EU. But Britain or the UK has always been a maritime power, right? And they're actually they're the way they're picking their allies is people look at it like they're picking Anglophone allies, but really they're trying to pick other maritime powers as allies as well, because they have the same interests. Like, so the US is surrounded basically on all sides by oceans. It's a maritime power. Obviously, Australia is a maritime power. Japan is a maritime power. And a lot of people don't realize, but Sweden is a huge maritime power. They really don't have any real border. I mean, they have borders, but they're up in, 10,000, 14,000 feet in mountain ranges with all their neighbors. So they have no land. There's no land route to invade Sweden. Their destiny has always been at sea. And Sweden's interests lie in the Baltics and in Poland as well. So you kind of see this alliance forming, like a North European defensive alliance. It's probably has a lot to do with why they wanted to bring Sweden and Finland into NATO as well, because and if you'll remember, the UK actually, before the vote to bring in Sweden and Finland, or the vote to invite them in, which I don't believe they're actually in yet because Turkey hasn't signed off on it, but the UK signed a separate alliance with them saying that doesn't matter if you get into NATO or not, we're coming to defend you. So I think you definitely see the UK maneuvering to create some kind of military alliance, like North European, Nordic, Baltic, naval alliance, essentially.
Yeah. So we have for the question, but I will move to the last, let's say, two questions, and then the final to close the panel in let's say 15 minutes. One that was very specific. So this one, it's this one it's very interesting because it's about the Russian doctrine about the use of nuclear weapons. So what are the chances for the Russian Federation to use small tactical nukes after the referendum, as after they can say that Ukraine is actively attacking Russian soil or people?
So let me start first then. Okay, the Russians will unlikely to do the referendum now or anytime soon. As much as all the rumors are going around, they say even the pro-Russian Telegram channels, they're talking about I'm going to do the referendum. This is exactly the problem the Russian leadership is facing. What if they do the referendum? These guys become part of Russia, and then Ukraine continue to attack Russia, attack the all these Zaporizhia, Kherson, all this region. Then what is the Russians' reaction is going to be? Should it be a bigger war? Send more troops to or more aggressive offensive? Use tactical nuke. It will present to them a very difficult internal political question. The war, they are confident they're going to win the war, but the problem is they cannot use a nuclear weapon, or they cannot. It's very hard to answer to their constituents because the war is very hard. It's very hard war. even if they're going to send out 10 times more troops, this is not going to say, oh, they're going to have 10 times the progress. It's not the case. The defensive positions is really hard to break. Nobody wants to die for nothing. So I don't think the referendum will come, which is why the likelihood of Russia using tactical nukes is near to zero. Especially Ukraine is not the same military as it was half a year ago. So that using a tactical nuke would be like an overkill, as far as I can tell. Yeah, and they have more powerful bombs they can use rather than nukes. Nukes is going to trigger a geopolitical backlash that the Russians are trying to avoid.
I have
Anybody
something to
else?
add to that as well. I don't think the referendums will be held 11th of September. I think they will be delayed further. And some credit to that is I heard a report that the Luhansk People's Republic said they want to wait with their referendum until after DPR has been completely liberated. So generally, I think it'll probably be at the end of the war. After the war is finished, then they'll hold the referendums, because Russia doesn't want to be forced into any situations. So if the referendums happen before the war is over, then it's because Russia wants it to happen. But if they don't want it to happen, then they will not happen.
And it would be very also bad. Imagine Kherson region votes to separate from Ukraine, and let's say Ukrainians recapture Kherson. It would be a humiliation for Russia, and they don't want to risk it. Like they don't want this to happen, but they know there's this possibility, and it would look very bad. Imagine a Russian region now falls into Ukrainian hands. How are they going to explain this nightmare to their population? So they're not going to go with the biggest risk. Like WeebUnion said, they'll wait until the end, and the best case scenario, when they really push the front line further and like it has died down, then they'll do it. But anytime soon, yeah.
So I have a quick response to the nuke thing, and then I have a question for war in Ukraine. So all I have to say about the nuke thing is there's absolutely no way that you're going to see the detonation of any kind of nuclear device. Like no matter really what happens in the war, like Russia has actually been playing its cards on the international stage, like its geopolitical maneuvering, despite its failures on the battlefield, throughout the war and the speed they're going at. The geopolitical maneuvering has been very good, and you see results in that based on these UN votes that have come up on various things in order to condemn Russia. Like a month after the war started, or a couple weeks after the war started, you have most of the countries in the world, I think 180 countries, voting to adopt, United Nations statements to condemn the war in Ukraine. A couple months later, you have almost half the countries, and then the most recent UN vote, there was only 58 countries out of over 200 sovereign nations in the world that agreed to condemn Russia. So like they're making gains in the UN in terms of these votes, right? Which, the population-wise, obviously, like they have majority of the population in the world, not necessarily backing them, but not willing to say that what they're doing is bad, right? So like they're dropping a nuke anywhere would completely reverse all of that ground gain. So in terms of the question that I have for war in Ukraine regarding referendums in Kherson and Zaporozhye, there's a lot of claims in the West on elections and Russia being largely rigged and not real. Of course, there's observers at these polls that claim that there's ballot stuffing, so the elections are rigged. Which my response to that is like, how do you know whose ballots are getting stuffed, right? And so it's difficult. Like, of course, the West has this view of Russia that is not actually democratic, even though they hold these elections and stuff. So any referendums held in Kherson and Zaporozhye, if they come with the outcome of those territories voting to become part of Russia, it's going to be viewed as illegitimate, and probably they're going to say that it was a false election, and that the votes were counted wrong, and just like how they've said the same thing with Crimea. Do you think in reality, like despite what the media says and everything, what do you think the percentage of people in Kherson and Zaporozhye is that would legitimately vote to join Russia, because these regions do have large Russian minorities, but even larger Russian-speaking populations. So, like, I guess you could say Russified Ukrainians. What do you think the line is in terms of support for joining Russia in reality compared to, regardless of the outcome of any election?
Yeah, no, the question is for war in Ukraine, but I will add also to this one, to all the panel, and where we will do the closing. Like, why didn't Russia at least launch the mining efforts near the port of Odessa, at least by using some of military equipment? So the question about legitimacy and potential voters of Kherson Oblast for the referendum, and also why Russians technically didn't demine the sea over the port of Odessa. War in Ukraine, if you want to answer, and then we will make the closing of the panel.
So just really focusing on this question from Ian. First of all, there is not huge Russian minority in Kherson region and Zaporizhia region, as opposed to, let's say, in Donetsk and Luhansk region.
Yeah.
Like native Russian, like it's, I mean, I wouldn't say it's more than 10-15%. So for that reason is actually Ukrainian side is able to carry out a lot of this guerrilla warfare, because there is actually Ukrainian ethnic majority there in both regions, and where there is large Russian, let's say, minority is actually in the city of Zaporizhia itself, in Melitopol. That's those kind of like two areas, dots basically. The rest, all of that rural area is majority overwhelmingly Ukrainian ethnically. And so there is not much support for Russian referendum there in the first place. And so that's why Russia has so far really failed to really have the like working administration there, working anything so far. They kind of like they're sitting on their like, I don't know, like sort of like Belarus in 1944 for Germans. Basically, that's kind of how it is there.
But at the same time, we cannot ignore the work of the, well, you said it yourself, the SBU or any agents eliminating anyone speaking against the Ukrainian government at the same time. So at the same time, because I remember at the beginning of the war, some people, well, like some, of course, there's some people that were like, okay, it's fine that they come, but many people got eliminated. Anyone neutral anyway was in trouble. But you're right, the Russians failed to protect the people there. So maybe now they feel more pro-Ukrainian than they were at the beginning. But
yeah, I agree with you. They feel more pro-Ukrainian right now than before. War makes everything black or white. You cannot sort of sit on two chairs during the war. So
but it could change. But it could change again. Perhaps if there's a Russian victory or one side or the other, perhaps it could change. But
well, I mean, you can change anything, but you in theory. But the situation is the following: the people see looting of their like economic resources and not ability to provide economic, like so that they have normal life economically. They also see atrocities that's being done to them, so that only moves them in the opposite direction to the Russian desires, right? And then, but yes, I do agree with you that all of this command operations and killings of their what is viewed from Ukrainian perspective as traitors, yeah, it makes everybody who's on the Russian side or could be potentially on the Russian side much more quiet and silent. I agree with that there is no question about that part. But going back to that question about, like, let's say a referendum, right? If it were normal situation and let's say there's no war, just everything ideal situation, there is no meddling, I would say it's 20 to 30% of the population would vote to be sort of with Russia in theory in those regions. So
that's ethnic Russians and then Russian-speaking Ukrainians.
No,
right?
it's no, because there's in that area, I would say 50-50 in terms of Russian-speaking population. Like the Russian language there is probably more dominant than Ukrainian language overall in that region. but the language is really not, in many ways, is not how it just should be viewed. It's more of the like philosophical view of the of everybody's kind of deciding for himself or herself, hey, I want this like strong, super strong government that decides everything for me, and like, I'm a, cog in the wheel, versus no, I want to make choices for myself. And that's really the dividing line, because you see a lot of ethnic Russians are fighting in Ukrainian army, right? There are Russians who are coming from Russia, like leaving Russia, fleeing Russia to basically live in Ukraine and join the Ukrainian armed forces. So it's more philosophical divide for the both countries than anything.
I would like to add to that. I've seen a very important lecture on Russian foreign policy by a professor in an American university. I don't remember which it was. But his take on the Russia-Ukraine war is that it is a moral war, where Ukraine is moving towards Western morals of liberty and freedom and democracy, while Russia is still in its conservative, orthodox, Christian, heavily that kind of morals. So the divide right now is whether or not whether or not you are Russian or Ukrainian, but whether or not you support Western morals or Russian morals. And we can see that on the global stage with how, as Ian mentioned, that the UN is changing the votes a lot, and how BRICS is becoming more relevant and predominant on the global stage. And that is because most of the third world actually agree more with the Russian take on a world system, where every regional power takes control for themselves and determine their own future, compared to a United States dominated world where they dictate for other countries what they can or cannot do. Even European countries like Germany is starting to think maybe we should determine our own future.
The war in Ukraine, only if you can answer to the question about Odessa, and then we will move to the ending, to the final
I
ending.
think honestly, like, we don't want to be sort of very blunt, but like, why would Russia ever want to demine port of Odessa? It's like someone is probably not watching our channels and don't follow what's going on there. I'm sorry to say that, and I think I'd rather we answer real question that's really relevant to the viewers, as opposed to this.
Yeah,
you're right. No, but
I would just add that it makes no sense tactically. Like, the Ukrainians basically boxed themselves in economically by doing that, and Russia's fine with that. B, if Russia really wanted to demine the ports, say they want to do a naval invasion of the South Odessa region, they can't get ships close enough. There's anti-ship missiles in the area, and I mean, as we saw with like the cruiser, whatever happened to it, like there's definitely been anti-ship missiles fired at the Black Sea Fleet, which Russia's not trying to risk minesweepers and very expensive military vessels over a suicide mission. Like that's not gonna happen.
Perfect. So, like, to close the panel, like I received a lot of questions. It's the same question that we are achieving from May. So we made some of our own prediction. Maybe someone have the truth or no. We will see. But the main question, it's like the same prediction of a war from all. Generally, how do you see the war ending? For the panel, what do you expect during the fall operational wise? So the same thing, it's the same question. It's about what is your opinion? Maybe we can put like 1-2 minutes at all, and then close like the panel, like from Ian, WarInUkraine, Alex, HistoryLegends, and WeebUnion, and we will close. Just to remember to all of you, in the description of the channel, there is all the channel of the viewers. Please enter in all the channels and subscribe to all of you. thank you for being in this live. It was amazing, very technical panel, and we have still, after 2 hours, 524 people. So starting from Jan, we lost Alex. I think that he will re-enter, but Jan, your prediction?
So just real quick, 2 minutes, I guess. I think, I mean, this is just my opinion, and I'm not going to throw a timetable on it, right? Because that's where you get in trouble with predicting the future, is when you start giving the timetable. But I mean, I think that Russia is not going to stop or make any effort to end the war until eastern Ukraine, everything east of the Dnieper, is under their control, and probably the coastline, the north coastline of the Black Sea, so Odessa and Mykolaiv. I think that the Dnieper gives them, in East Ukraine, gives them more or less the strategic buffer that they want, gives them strategic depth for any potential defense in the future, for say like a 2-3 year war, or however long it's going to take. I think that would be satisfactory to the Russian public that is in support of the war. I think that ending the war in its current state, or anywhere near the boundaries in its current state, would probably be political suicide for Putin's government. So I think that they definitely have designs on everything east of the Dnieper and probably Odessa. In terms of the Russian position after that, I think that they'll be in a much better position strategically than they were going into the war, despite any kind of manpower losses. Go next.
War in Ukraine, and if I can add, what could be, in your opinion, the chance of a deal between the two parts for a ceasefire? So what can Russia and Ukraine, I know that it's difficult to say it now, but to achieve a ceasefire and a peace, what Ukraine can agree to lose, or Russia at this moment?
So talking about the sort of peace or truce or whatever, ceasefire, I think what Ukraine can sort of agree to is to remain out of NATO and EU. I think that's where the only way I see where this can be, there could be peace that could be acceptable for both sides, is Ukraine keeps the sort of territory, but agrees to stay out of NATO and EU for foreseeable future. Sort of what Finland did in 1945-46, without at the same time, Ukrainian population is not ready for territorial concessions. That's just not even from a perspective of like simply about as a principle, simply because of economic integrity of Ukraine and being able to be I would say not being like then chewed up piecemeal by Russia. But the good example, and I made the video a long time ago about the partitions of Poland. If anyone, the best sort of like case from the past is those partitions of Poland. And if Ukraine gives a little bit of its territory, then that's it. It's not able to sort of stand up to Russia going forward. And so even for that reason, for basically survival of Ukraine cannot accept the territorial concessions. At the same time, Russia does not accept anything but the unconditional surrender at this point. And Russia wants all of the Ukraine. It doesn't want this Donbass or Crimea or Kherson region. They want all of the Ukraine. It's very clear. The only concession they're willing to sort of give is to give, like Lviv region and Ivano-Frankivsk, Ternopil region, that part to Poland, with the future of idea like, okay, you grabbed our territories, we're gonna kick you later once we have more power, meaning Poland. Because Poland is the next item on the Russia's list, very clearly, even though it's not announced sort of publicly. And Russia hopes that this whole EU collapses, NATO collapses, then Poland will be sort of up for the grabs, basically, with the Germany, by the way. And the Polish leadership is clearly realizing that. They becoming very vocal about their Germany and all of that stuff. So, and in terms of where it's going to go, predictions are kind of to extent useless. But the big question is about Russian leadership. Are they ready to double down with some sort of mobilization, even not full-scale mobilization, but something, because they clearly lacking in manpower, and it's going to get only worse because there will be fewer and fewer volunteers. So where that will decide sort of the fate, and it's really hard to predict. That's why the whole prediction hinges on that one question, and I don't have answer for that.
You know, it's interesting because it makes me think of the situation for Britain in 1914, 1915, when at first they had a lot of volunteers, but quickly enough their army was shrinking, so they had to make a call, like conscription. So you're right, if Russia doesn't move and bring more troops, they cannot expect to move forward. Like, they're already at the max capacity. But I would say it all depends also on the battles playing out now in the field. I think if Ukraine can win battles and convince Western countries to send them more stuff, like, for example, why haven't they received Abrams or Challengers, Leopards 2, French Leclerc? That's a question, right? They could have all this nice European stuff too. So I think that the next battles will be very important to shift the narrative, especially before the winter. And that's what I think. So I'm just looking at the conflict that we have right in front of us, because any further prediction, I mean, it's just going to bring trouble, and it's mostly going to be false.
Weird.
So, so what will happen next? I think the real war is not on the battlefield. In the current situation, the real war is in the geopolitical space. So the war is between the attrition, not between Ukraine and Russia, but it's between EU, NATO, or US with Russia. Can the Europe survive with this energy war now that we are seeing now? I think I just saw a post on Telegram saying that Gazprom have cut 100% of the gas supply to Europe. So I'm not sure that's accurate. I simply see this one-liner, and which means that the Russians are had enough, and they're just gonna test out the political will of Europe. And if the political will of Europe falters, they are unable to support Ukraine further because they have to make this concession with Russia to get the gas, and then the Russia will be demanding, I can give you gas but no more weapons. Then the Ukraine will find it really hard to fight on, because as a war in Ukraine had repeated many times about the lack of heavy equipment, which is true. Even HIMARS supply, I have been telling my viewers from time to time, I say they need at least 5 to 10 times more of the number of HIMARS that they supply. If not, then it's not going to change the war much. It's going to create a lot of inconveniences, but it's not changing the war. And no air forces, I don't think it's a big issue, but it's the artillery is important because it's an artillery war. So I think I'm not sure what will turn out, because I tried predicting what Putin will do. I don't think Russia will have invaded directly into Ukraine. I thought they will fight through Donbass. I was wrong, because that means they did not use the Georgian war strategy. They basically just invaded directly into Ukraine. So that was a surprise to me already. So it's very hard to. And then I was like, I thought that Putin would be more aggressive, in the energy pressure. But they didn't. They are very patient. They even give gas for months to and then now they cut. I thought they would have cut it at least 3 months ago. So things is not the way how I predicted. So I would urge everyone to look at the geopolitical space, look at how Europe, all the different European countries, especially the major ones, Italy, France, Germany, UK, perhaps even Spain, they'll see how they actually react. I think Poland is not important because Poland will always be anti-Russia. They were like, no, we will all die for the sake of that killing Russia. So Poland is not very important, but the key players in European Union, I think we need to watch how they behave. United States is not important because to them, they just want money. They just want to sell weapons. So they already have land lease. So they will just go on forever. The energy crisis isn't affecting them as bad as what is happening in Europe. Yeah. So that's my conclusion.
Perfect. We have to thank WeebUnion, and then I will give my conclusion, please.
I agree with Wyatt, mostly as he mentions this geopolitical stage that the real war is happening in. And to add on why the Russians waited this long with cutting the gas prices or the complete cut of gas deliveries is one, to keep some sort of hope that they will eventually open it up. Every time they say, okay, we'll cut it by 20%, we just need this thing, and then they keep doing it. And finally, they finally received the turbine. Now they're saying they're going to fix it, and they will close it for 3 days, but they'll probably not go up to capacity again, as we have seen with how they went to 20%. They said only for 3 days. Now it's been a month. Also, I think generally how this war will end is based on the European reaction, because Ukraine cannot continue this war with only American support. How will they receive if the European countries do not supply? And finally, there's a very important fact that apparently the United States have banned exports of their own oil to other countries, which means that oil prices will rise even further in Europe. I live in Denmark, and any energy source has increased drastically. We have government-supplied gas, not gas, heat, and that has just doubled next month from what was already 10 times as much to now 20 times as much from 2 years ago. Wood heating that I use in my house has gone from 200 euros to 1,000 euros, where I actually have to pay 10,000 euros for 1 year of heating. Heating only, not electricity. Electricity is already raised by 20 times. So this heating price is beyond anything. Lucky countries like Spain and Sweden, where they have nuclear energy or a direct connection with Morocco, allows them to have low prices still. But the rest of the European countries, especially Italy, is suffering the most. They say the average price in Italy is 656 euros compared to here in Denmark, where it's 400 euros. So we are still on a safer side compared to other countries. So yeah, generally I think it's going to heavily depend on Europe, because Europe has no natural resources except for coal, and Germany has decided to basically take all coal and not sell it to anyone. So they're taking all the coal. So other countries are going to suffer from that as well. So generally, the European situation is going to determine the outcome of the Ukraine war. There's already talks in the current German government to force Ukraine into peace talks with Russia, because they don't want the war to continue so that they can buy from Russia again.
I will just say that if I was paying 10,000 euros a year for electricity, for heat, I would be walking around like Jon Snow. I would be wearing beaver pelts and a bearskin jacket. That's all I'm saying.
Luckily, we have had a warm summer, but we have already closed our heating system. We have no heat right now.
I want to thank you all, but only for make a conclusion, because you make a citation or a quote of Italy. In my opinion, as I said, from Germany, like from March, from May, July, whatever, the balance will be Germany. I repeat to you. Remember that Italy now is depending on Russian gas, technically only 10-15% from 40. So Germany is still 50. And if you take a look of this one, the problem will not the heating and electricity for the families, because government can make a budget reserve, like in Italy. The new government for sure will make a change of the budget of 30 billion euro to reduce the gas bills and the electricity. The problem will be industries. Italy and Germany, it's 50% of the sole production of all Europe, only Italy and Germany. And the high production, like check only this thing, and then we will close. Check the biggest BASF industry location in Germany. It's one agglomerate that is 15 kilometers squared with 40,000 employers inside. It's like a Chinese factory in Germany. Chemicals, fertilizer, everything inside. They're connected directly with Nord Stream 1, not with the German gas supplier. So at the moment, like the prediction of Gazprom is to reactivate Nord Stream 1 the third day of September. When we'll see. But at the moment, they still are giving gas. The problem will be that Germany have no LNG ports. So they cannot import LNG. They completely tied themselves to Russia. And Southern Europe, in this case, it's much safer because, for example, Italy have direct connection with Algeria, Libya, Azerbaijan. We have LNG. Spain, Portugal, Greece have LNG. And the good news, we will make a panel about this, about China. China is now, nobody's talking about it, but it's in a very bad condition. Check about the LNG importing of China. It's decreased 20%. So the economy is not growing. They are decreasing the energy consumption. About the COVID, let's say, limitation still very high in China. So as everybody said, the situation is more geopolitical than warfare. So let's see what will happen. Thank you all for being in this panel. We have still, after 2 hours, 500 people connected, so it was a great success. So thanks to Jan, NewWorldecon, War in Ukraine, Alex, HistoryLegends, we at Defense Politics Asia, WeebUnion, Dima, MilitarySummary. Please go and subscribe to every channel of the speakers, and see you in the next panel.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Ciao.